John MacArthur admits prior church COVID outbreak, own illness. I've been seeing some comments on my videos pointing out this report, which is from julieroys.com. And people are basically saying that John MacArthur and other people associated with him were not being very honest about COVID at their church, and now he's admitting what before he was covering up. I'm going to comment on this whole situation. You can see at the beginning of the article here, it says, on Sunday, John MacArthur acknowledged for the first time that COVID-19 swept through Grace Community Church last winter, a fact he's failed to admit until now, despite evidence reported months ago by the Roys Report. MacArthur also divulged that he and his wife had COVID last December. So I will say that when it comes to this whole situation, we've seen it over and over again. Depending on how you look at Pastor John MacArthur, you can see the same exact evidence either one way or another when you're looking at the exact same data, the exact same situation. That is so often the case for us as humans. I'm going to take a look at the video clip that is shared in this article so that you can see what he says for yourself and you can make your own assessment. I'm going to comment as I watch this video. But I think what you'll see is that those who are biased one way are going to tend to see it one way. Those who are biased another way are going to see the same thing very differently. I'm going to try to be as fair as possible in the whole situation, but of course I have my own viewpoint and things that I lean toward myself. So let's take a look at what MacArthur actually said.
I know that many of you, if not most of you, have been exposed to the media talking about the settlement of the lawsuit between our church and the county. I don't know what you've read or haven't read, but I do want to make a few comments on that.
So this is actually a situation I just reported on last weekend, and I think this whole legal situation is going to be voted on today as I'm recording this, which is a Tuesday, although this video may not come out on a Tuesday. But he is talking about the legal battles that he and the state of California and LA County have had with their church, and the legal settlement that ultimately is happening in favor of their church.
It appears from what we are reading, like you're reading, that this lawsuit is going in our favor, and we're deeply grateful for that. We've been getting those kinds of signals for the last number of weeks, and what has come recently is the city itself put on the agenda for this coming Tuesday night the resolution of this lawsuit, and that's what the media picked up. But I do want to correct a few things. First of all, there were statements made there about outbreaks and deaths and things like that, there is no evidence that can be traced back to Grace Church in those situations.
So I think this is really interesting right off the bat that what he's actually talking about here is kind of a defense of his church. He doesn't think that COVID-19 had an outbreak that can be traced back to their church specifically. So that's something very important to keep in mind here. He's not actually saying that their church in any way had some sort of a major outbreak that was due to them meeting in violation of COVID health regulations.
So we understand that obviously many people contracted COVID. We understand that. It probably went through our church in maybe December, January. That's when I began to realize how many people were ill. And that's when Patricia and I enjoyed our own bout with COVID for about a week and a half, and we were fine, and we're thankful for that.
So that's what some people are zeroing in on in the comments that he made last Sunday. They're saying, see, he is admitting that there was this outbreak at his church. What I heard him say there, and I think this is important, is he's basically saying that probably in December, January, that time frame, their church did have a lot of COVID cases. He wasn't really saying that there was some sort of a major outbreak because he says probably, which means that this was not documented. There weren't necessarily a lot of people getting tested to see whether they had COVID. Even he himself, we don't know whether he was tested, and that never has really come out clearly. So what I'm hearing in this is he's making a conjecture that, yeah, there definitely was COVID at their church. He is admitting that, or saying that that is likely what happened. If you look at the statistics of LA County, definitely in the time period that he's talking about, there were a lot of COVID cases, a large spread of COVID-19. So it definitely makes sense that it was spreading at that time. And yes, there were certainly people at his church, and he's saying that he contracted it. Again, though, what we don't know is whether he was ever tested. There are some people who are seeing this from one perspective, and they think he's really covering things up. The thing that I would say in all of this, though, is that if he was really covering things up and he didn't want people to know, why would he be saying it now? I think probably a more accurate assessment of the situation is that he was probably trying to downplay his sickness and what was happening in his church, because he didn't want his church to be blamed for an outbreak. And I do think there are people that are quick to blame his church if there's COVID-19, and so I think that's why they were downplaying it at the time. But I don't think they were ever denying that people had COVID-19. Some people are saying that there were denials or there was suppression. I actually reported on that last winter. But I think that's where you're going to see, again, people who view MacArthur in one way are going to see the data one way and the events one way, and people who are more pro-MacArthur are going to see it very differently.
So the Lord has protected us through this, and I just want you to know that I'm not trying to be a doctor, but I do believe that God has designed us to be able to live in a world of viruses, and that the best way to do that is to live together so that we build up our immune systems, and that's what's starting to come out in the media at this particular point. And those people who are isolated are in a more difficult position because they don't have the normal defenses. God has done wonderful things in the human body to allow us to survive all of this. But I do want you to know we're grateful to the Lord. We're also grateful to the Lord that the county and the state of California wants to settle this because they do not want a trial. That would not serve them well, since Grace Church has flourished in this entire period of time. I will say this, there's no money coming to Grace Church. There was a statement about $400,000 coming from the county and $400,000 from the state. That goes to the Thomas More Society. They paid all the legal costs. We haven't paid 1 cent for legal fees in all this year and a half, and so that would go to reimburse them, along with another $1 million, I think, that the state of California spent on legal fees. So nothing will come to us except the affirmation that the Lord preserved and protected us through this, and we'll know more about that on Tuesday when the council meets. But it's just an amazing to see the Lord protecting us.
So he is clarifying there that in the legal situation, it has been reported that the church is going to receive, I actually read it was a total of around $800,000. But as he's saying there, it's not really the church that's ultimately going to get that money. It's going to be given, I believe, to the Thomas More Society, who has been representing them legally. And from what I could tell there, they've been doing it free of charge. So the church is going to reimburse them for their services with the money that they receive. So again, and this is something I did say last weekend, they're not really making money off of this situation. It is very expensive to get into legal battles. They are a high-profile church. I think that's one of the reasons that that legal organization was willing to pick up their case. And some people have pointed out, well, it's kind of unfair. This is the only church that has had a good outcome. One thing I will point out with that, though, is that with legal situations, a lot of times there's precedent that is set. So even if other churches weren't represented explicitly or directly, because Grace Church won their case legally, it actually does tend to give more protection for other churches that are following the same practices. But ultimately, what it's looking like is going to happen is that the church is going to receive money, but then that's going to be paid to the legal organization who is representing them.
And along that line, just a couple of comments. The most vaccinated country in the world is Israel. I think it's as high as 90% vaccination. And they are having a very severe outbreak. And so they've been doing some interesting studies, and one came out yesterday, a very high-level medical study analyzing 800,000 people in this COVID situation, and they came to this conclusion that if you have only the vaccine and not the natural immunity from COVID, you are 13 times more likely to get COVID asymptomatically and 27 times more likely to get COVID with symptoms. In other words, the natural immunity that God has designed is the greatest protection. I hope you understand what I said. If you have only the vaccine, you are 27 times more likely to get COVID than if you have the natural immunity. And again, that speaks to the issue.
So he's really trying to bring out the point here that natural immunity is better than the vaccine immunity for people who take the vaccine. And he's really just trying to say, see, God has designed us in such a way that it is better for us just to have that natural immunity. The thing I will comment on, just to be fair about all of the statistics in the situation, first of all, he talked about Israel having a 90% vaccine rate, I think he said. Here are the stats that I saw, and you can look at this in detail, and you can see actually it depends on the age group. For people who are age 90 plus, they did have a very high vaccination rate. And people in their 70s, it was actually 93.1. But it does say that the rates decline among younger age groups. And you can see that it goes down for people in their 60s, 50s, 40s, and then it gets even quite a bit lower in the 30s and 20s. And then the 16 to 19 age group is only 68% vaccinated, and only 26.2 of 12 to 15-year-olds are fully vaccinated. So just in the interest of accuracy, those are the actual rates that I'm hearing about in Israel. But another thing that needs to be clarified in really what this is reporting is this is comparing people who are vaccinated not to people who are unvaccinated and have never had COVID. What I'm hearing in this whole situation is it's people who are vaccinated versus people who have already had COVID. So that's a very important thing to think about. And actually, in this article here, it says that the study does not discourage vaccination because unvaccinated people are still more likely to be infected with COVID or hospitalized than vaccinated people. So if you've never had COVID, then you're still more likely to get COVID than a vaccinated person. And really the issue here, and this is where people who are more pro-vaccine are going to bring this out, and I think a lot of people who are against the vaccine sometimes will try to make a huge thing as to how effective is the vaccine against contracting COVID. But that's not the only issue at play. The question is, what kind of outcome are you going to have if you do contract COVID? And it seems like, from what I have heard, that you are less likely to be hospitalized or die from COVID if you've had the vaccine. So yes, natural immunity is good. If you do contract COVID and survive that whole situation, and of course the likelihood of you actually dying, as many have pointed out, is not that high. However, just in the interest of fairness in terms of how the debate is actually playing out, if you have the vaccine and you do contract COVID, you're less likely to be hospitalized and die of it, is what people are saying. And once you've had it, even if you've had the vaccine, then you're still going to be even more immune to it in the future. So it still doesn't make the case necessarily that it's bad to get the vaccine just based on the medical information that we have. But I do understand why people have moral reservations about getting the vaccine, and I do think it is a matter of personal conscience, and we should have freedom when it comes to our medical decisions.
From the science side, that God has a way of taking care of us as we love each other and share our germs. So that's an important thing for you to know. There has not been any word from the county at all, county health department, tracing any kind of outbreak to Grace Community Church. We're grateful for that.
So that's a key point that he brings up at the end there, is that in reality, there hasn't been any evidence that has traced an outbreak or a major problem back to the church itself. I thought it was interesting people wanted me to talk about this as if this was vindication for those who have been critical of MacArthur. And I'm sure from their vantage point, they see it as being some sort of vindication. But again, if he was trying to cover something up, I don't see why he would be open about it right now. And he's open about the fact that, yes, if you look back at that time period, it does seem, it's very plausible that they had COVID going through their church. But what he's ultimately getting at here is that in the legal situation, there is no evidence that their church caused any kind of a major problem or outbreak other than what was normally, already happening in LA at the time. In their church, he says they did contract it, but God protected them, and that there are actually reasons to think that our natural immunity is a really good thing to have during this time, and not to avoid situations where we are going to ultimately build up our immunity as a population. Now, he does definitely have a certain vantage point he's coming from there, and I know not everybody agrees with that, but I really don't see in this whole situation anything that somehow indicts the church. Again, legally speaking, they're actually off the hook, and they're going to actually receive money. So it seems like everything has really ultimately backed up their position and gone in their favor, regardless of what you think about his medical perspective. So I know some people wanted me to look at that, comment on it, so I have. And perhaps you have agreed with what I have said. Maybe you disagree with what I have said on certain points, or maybe all the points. I don't know. But those are some thoughts that I have on this, and I will try to keep you posted once I hear about what actually happens with the legal situation and whether they are awarded the money, whether they do actually receive that settlement. But of course, as always, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments section. But thank you so much for taking some time to listen to this report and some of my thoughts, brought to you from A Frisch Perspective.